What's up, everybody? I'm Katie,
And I'm Morgan.
and this is For Your Misinformation. We are two Midwestern feminists here to break down the political news that you need to know without the misinformation that you don't.
Let us break down the problem and tell you what we're doing and what you can do to help solve it.
Hi, everyone. Today we have a really interesting interview that you guys are going to love, but I want to talk about impeachment first because this is the last episode that's going to come out before Trump's second impeachment trial starts. So I wanted to get some stuff out of the way before we hear from Maya Jenkins, who is just super inspirational, and you guys are going to love hearing from her. So, but first, like the bad stuff. Okay, impeachment 2. So the trial starts on Tuesday. If you're listening to this the day it comes out. The trial starts tomorrow. We know a lot more now than we did on January 6th when Trump originally incited the insurrection. And there's also like a lot we can learn from the first impeachment trial, I think. So at first I was super excited that the Democrats control the Senate now and like, yay, they're going to call witnesses. But now it's like, because the Senate has shit to do, like past COVID relief and like actual governing shit, they don't want to call witnesses. Like they don't want to draw this out. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, that's tragic. And like a little bit, I mean, I would love to hear from like people testify against Donald Trump. But in this case, the charge is inciting an insurrection. So like they wouldn't be able to call witnesses to hear about like the Russia stuff. I don't think. Maybe, but I don't, whatever. Also, they're like they can prove plenty without any witnesses because the insurrectionists themselves like posted videos of themselves on Parler being like, hey, I'm here inside the Capitol because Donald Trump inspired me to YOLO 420. I don't know, whatever they'd say, whatever they sound like. But some of them sound like Olympians, you know? I mean, there was an Olympic gold medalist there who, I don't know. Where are these people getting radicalized? We have to talk about it, but not right now. All right, so don't need witnesses. Plenty of very damning evidence that people posted of themselves on Parler and other places, like explicitly saying that they were attacking the Capitol because they were inspired by Donald Trump. They were saying that they came to DC that day because Donald Trump told them to. They went to Trump's rally on January 6th. They heard Trump tell the crowd to march to the Capitol and fight like hell, and then they did. This is a formula, and a violent mob was really the only possible outcome to it. On January 6th, Trump supporters gathered at a rally at Washington, D.C.'s Ellipse Park. Various people talked to the crowd from the Trump world, including Donald Trump Jr. and Rudy Giuliani. And then directly following Giuliani's speech, the organizers of that event played a video. And to people who study fascist propaganda, who like understand the history of the use of videos in political propaganda, it was very clear to them watching it what a dangerous situation it was. And in it, like you see all the themes that you see that history warns that pose like a violent threat to a liberal democracy. And like the aim of fascist propaganda is to incite and mobilize. So like that's what happened to the crowd. Like they were incited and mobilized. They marched to the Capitol. They broke and at least 5 people died. Like it's a tragedy and it should not be glossed over. Like he should absolutely be convicted. So be like armed with that knowledge, and then also we should understand like what the other side is going to try to argue And then, okay, one other thing. Speaking of the like videos that people posted themselves, like incriminating themselves on the internet, being inside the Capitol breaking shit. There's also that like recording of Donald Trump and Brad Raffensperger. Like there's just like a lot of stuff out in the public record that's like very incriminating, that says like, yeah, no, of course that's what he was trying to do. Of course he was trying to incite a riot. Like what else would he try to be doing? Yeah, and then another difference is that the last impeachment was super confusing. Like they would have needed witnesses to try to explain the story of like what was going on in Ukraine, and like Trump trying to extort. Wow, I can't even remember his name. I used to like think about him a lot. Sorry, Ukrainian president, you have fallen out of my brain. Oh, yeah, but then, okay, but Mitch McConnell was in control of the Senate then, so he was like, I don't feel like having witnesses. Trump is benefiting me right now. We'll just leave him in place, even though it's super dangerous. And then the worst thing possible could have happened. There was a pandemic that he mismanaged, and now at least 500,000 Americans are going to die, which is bonkers and very sad if you think about it too much. But this trial, this impeachment 2, is super clear. Like Trump's lawyers are going to be like, Donald Trump didn't inspire these people to act. They did it on their own. And then they're going to cut to like 8 different mediocre white guys on Parler being like, hell yeah, Donald Trump told us to be here, and now we're doing it. And then like that's going to be pretty obvious to anybody with a brain that Trump incited the riot. Now, that doesn't mean that enough Republican senators are going to do the right thing and vote to convict him. It would take 67 votes, which is 17 Republican senators. And I don't know if there are 17 Republican senators who have like the moral conviction and leadership to stand up in this moment, which sucks, but like at least they'll be on record again. I don't know. But okay, and what really, really sucks, this is the part that sucks. This is like the misinformation part of it. It's not a regular trial. There's no judge to be like, hey, lawyers, you can't just like come up here and lie. Like because it's a civil trial and like John Roberts is presiding over it, but he's not like a judge he can't tell them not to, like they can argue whatever they want without getting in trouble. So their main case is going to be that you can't impeach someone who's already out of office, or this is what their main case will probably be. You can't impeach somebody who's already out of office. One, the House impeached him while he was still in office. And 2, that's not true anyway. It has been done in the past, just not with the president, but they have impeached like cabinet officials in the past after they've left office and like convicted not to, or disqualified them from holding office again, because this is exactly what it's for, to keep dangerous people from holding power. And reminder, we tried to do this a year ago, but Mitch McConnell wouldn't take it seriously, wouldn't call witnesses, and then every Republican except for Mitt Romney decided to do nothing. So whatever. So like we tried to hold him accountable before. We would have loved to hold him accountable before while he was still in power, but you guys Republicans didn't let us. And then I hate these bad faith arguments. Here's what Joni Ernst, Morgan's senator, said about it. Quote, Congress would be opening itself to a dangerous standard of using impeachment as a tool for political revenge against a private citizen. Okay, Joni. Yeah, that's the dangerous standard that we should be worried about. Not letting a violent insurrection go unpunished. Like, don't you think that might set a dangerous standard? Like, no. Joni is worried that they're going to start prosecuting ex-presidents if we start doing it. Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Okay. And yeah, and because this is a civil court and not a criminal court, there's nothing that stopping his lawyers from lying. So they can argue, if they wanted to, they could argue that the election was a fraud. A judge would not let them argue that in a normal courtroom because it's just, every case has just been like hearsay. But in the Senate trial, like 40 senators already voted that you can't convict someone who's no longer in Congress, which is a legally baseless argument. It's just a complete dodge of responsibility. And it wouldn't be allowed in criminal court, and it shouldn't be allowed in the Senate, but it is, so that is what we should expect. So they're probably going to say like, well, we can't convict and disqualify somebody who's already left office. Like, yeah, we can. And then they're going to be like, well, that sets a dangerous precedent. It's like, no, it doesn't. And they might even say like, well, there was fraud. And keep in mind that if they were in a criminal court, like those lawyers would get in huge trouble for telling lies like that. But because this is civil court, they can do whatever they want. I don't know, just these calls for unity with fascists and like supporters of fascism without accountability and facing the truth of what they've done and what they believe, like we're just paving the way for fascism's rise in the future. Like it has to be denounced hard, and that is why if you have a Republican senator, you really need to call and demand that they vote to convict Donald Trump and disqualify him from ever holding office ever again. But really, all of us should call. Like, let's all call our senators. There's a link in the bio of this episode, and there's also a link in our link tree, which is always at the bottom of every episode, and in our social media bios. That connects you with an indivisible script that connects you with your senators and lets them know how you feel about impeachment and conviction. And like, it's possible that with enough calls, like Republican senators could find some courage and decide to do that. But like, they need a lot of grassroots pressure, because right now, like the calculation that they're doing is that they'll be punished more for voting to impeach Trump, to convict Trump, than they will for not. And like, either we need to put enough pressure on them now that they're like, oh shit, they're like, my voters will be mad if I vote to let this guy get away with this shit. And if they don't, then like, it's your job to make sure that when they're up in 2022 or 2024 or 2026, that they get primaried by somebody, or not really primaried by somebody, just like replaced with a Democrat, like, and hopefully a very progressive one. Yeah, because the worst possible thing that could happen is that they could vote to impeach Trump, and then they could get replaced by a more extreme Republican like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or Madison Cawthorn, who are like the new incoming Republicans. And not like, what we need is for the ones who vote against impeachment to be replaced by people like Mitt Romney and John McCain and I don't know, you get it. But there's not that many of those guys left. There's not many like moderate Republicans left. Like, they're heading towards Marjorie Taylor Greene territory. And keep in mind that on the left, and this is getting so long and I feel bad, please listen to the whole interview because it is so interesting. I feel like I'm rambling, but these are all like really important points, I think. But this is the last one. Last point is that people talk about how dangerous the extremes are, right? Like the extreme left, the extreme right. So right now, the extreme right is Marjorie Taylor Greene, who refuses to wear a mask and thinks that that is the biggest thing that is like causing her oppression in her life, which is just delusional. And Lauren Boebert and Madison Cawthorn, like they're extreme. They believe conspiracy theories. Their beliefs are dangerous. Like, they resulted in the insurrection at the Capitol, like Pizzagate, all of this violence based on conspiracy theories is because of that extreme. So let's look, and then let's consider the extreme left. We're the extreme left. We think AOC is their alternative to Marjorie Taylor Greene. And oh my God, there's just so much. But AOC is basing her policy proposals on things that are happening in other countries right now that have better health outcomes. She's not crazy for thinking that that's possible. Marjorie Taylor Greene is crazy. So I just keep in mind when people try to make those equivalencies, it drives me insane. Okay, that's all. Please enjoy this interview with Maya. I enjoyed it so much, and I can't wait for you guys to hear it.
Hi, everybody. We have a special guest with us today. Her name is Maya, and she is a program associate at Impactual. And we are really excited to talk to her about, I'm most excited to talk about how to hold my white friends and family accountable in particular. Maya, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you so much. I've never been described as a special guest, so I am beaming. I feel very special, and I am incredibly excited to be on with you today.
Well, good. Thank you. I'm very excited too. So do you want to explain a little bit what Impactual does?
Yeah, so Impactual works with companies and causes and people to help drive measurable social impact. So we support people and brands that want to help solve big social problems, like low voter turnout, which has historically been a huge problem in the United States. Mm-hmm. And we figure out either how to plug folks into existing initiatives. So we helped companies work with National Voter Registration Day this past cycle to help folks all around the country, millions of them, register to vote, or we help people launch their own programs. So, an example, this year we helped MTV, Comedy Central, and about a dozen nonprofits launch Power the Polls, which worked to solve the poll worker shortage problem, which looked like it was going to be a huge issue. And then folks around the country banded together, and actually things went incredibly smoothly leading up to Election Day and on Election Day. So we work really hard to help folks who are part of huge organizations or just people who really, really care to really tap into social impact in all of its forms.
I am glad to hear that, because there are so many well-intended people who are not using their time or resources so effectively. I think something clicked earlier for me earlier in the year, and it was I don't have to be coming up with any new ideas. There are plenty of people, Stacey Abrams knows what's going on. I just have to do what she says. Yeah. So that has been kind of helpful, useful, but it's so helpful to have somebody focused on outcomes, because intent is great, but good outcomes are better.
Definitely. And it's also always super inspiring to actually realize that there are folks everywhere who have been working on the issues that you might be new to for decades. There are people who have made it their life's work, and to be able to work alongside them and learn from them is really empowering, and also less pressure as a person who, might be new to something or just not as experienced as a lot of other folks who are out there. So, yeah.
Cool. So how did you end up at Impactual? What does your path into politics look like?
That is a great question. So I am 22 years old. I just turned 22 last month, January 4th.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. It's funny because I certainly do feel like I am in politics, but it's an interesting question about my past, because I've kind of always felt like my life has been saturated by political ideas and thinking. As a Black woman, I have, been inundated since I was very young with ideas about how you can participate fully in the United States, just as a citizen. And that process has always seemed political. So, my grandmother was a civil rights activist. She did a lot of work in the 60s. My grandfather was standing behind Martin Luther King during the I Have a Dream speech.
That's amazing.
And I have always had those kinds of images and stories ground my understanding of how I came to exist. And that existence, it definitely feels political, not in the sense that I feel that my identity should be politicized, but that I need to engage in the process of power bargaining in order to have the kind of life that I think I deserve and that I think most, if not all, people deserve. Mm-hmm. So, coming out of that more storytelling based learning about my family and our story, I, kind of translated that into the kinds of things that I wanted to study in high school. I was really interested in how people have used the electoral process in order to gain power, voting rights, criminal justice reform. Those kinds of issues have always very much been of interest to me. And then as a college student, I joined this organization called the Institute of Politics at my school. I go to Harvard. And through that organization, I actually met Ashley, who is the founder of Impactual, who is a wonderful person. I describe her as my fairy godmother.
Oh, yeah, she seems
But
great.
I met her she's wonderful. I met her as a mentor and quickly understood that there was a niche being carved out really by her and the other folks at Impactual that focuses on the intersection of culture and politics, and trying to appeal to folks in a way that's similar to the way I've always thought of politics, which is that it actually saturates all of our lives, whether we realize it or not. And we can use the power of cultural production, the power of art, the power of brands, the power of the companies that we love and that we buy products from, all of those things to hammer home how important politics, however you think of them, however you define them, are to all of us. And so, I finished my junior year in college and the pandemic struck. And not only did the pandemic strike, but a racial uprising, occurred, and we're still, in its throes. Mm-hmm. And the 2020 election was in full swing. And I said, well, if there was ever a time to take a break from school in order to actually participate in what I believe to be an incredibly important democratic process, it is now. So I reached out to Ashley, whom I love, and was lucky enough to be able to join the Impactual team. And so I've been at Impactual as a program associate since May and have never felt so empowered to participate in democracy, have never felt as though I actually matter as much as I feel that I do now. And it's been an absolutely incredible experience and one that I hope to continue even when I do eventually return to school in the fall, even when the pandemic is over. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't know. There's so much of that I didn't know. Yeah, I thought it's interesting to hear you mention your family's experience with civil rights. And this is like a privilege that I get that I wasn't something that I was like worried about or thinking about, but it, after the uprising,
mm-hmm.
and not after, like we are going through a cultural mm-hmm. moment. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, this is history too. This will be written about as mm-hmm. history. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you can read. I mean, and I Martin Luther King Jr.'s Guide to Strive. I forgot. Okay, sorry. I'm reading it right now.
Yeah,
but it's
that
obvious.
happens to me a lot.
It's obvious that like this is just a continuation of that. Like we are always striving for this to be like more of a multiracial democracy that mm-hmm. they like promised us that it was, but now we're actually mm-hmm. trying to make it into that reality. I'm heartened that there's so much that we can learn from the past, and it's like, oh, this is a huge opportunity. Like, yeah, everybody should be throwing as much as they can into making as much progress right now as they can because
Mhm.
like there will probably at some point enter like kind of a lull again. Like I felt like we had been in, and like it took somebody like Donald Trump to wake people up to
Mhm.
be like, hey, we still need the Voting Rights Act. Like, just a lot of stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's very cool.
Yeah.
Were
Well,
you? Sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna ask. I think I saw on your LinkedIn that you were an intern for Elizabeth Warren. Is that right?
Yes, that is
Okay,
correct.
please tell me about that.
Oh my goodness, that was absolutely incredible. I interned for her in the summer of 2018, I guess it was. So that was after my freshman year of college. I was in her office in DC, and she is an absolutely incredible woman. She is a very busy woman, and yet she always made time to come down and talk to us interns. We were in a small intern room in her office. She had lunch with us. And she would often take us to events where she was meeting with constituents. She's really, really wonderful. She's kind. She's extremely intelligent, which I'm sure I don't have to tell you or anyone. And working for her was truly one of the greatest pleasures of my life. And when I was working in her office, it was the height of the child separation at the border, and it was clear that the moral imperative that she and a lot of other senators felt was, it kind of gripped every aspect of our work for a time. And it was really something to be there at that time when this absolutely horrifying thing was happening to children in our country. And so I definitely feel like it was a catalyst clearly for a lot of people around the country. And I felt, as someone who was uniquely positioned to see what that was actually doing to folks who are working in the halls of power, to see that, to be able to see on people's faces that they were gripped with horror was important for me. And I think that not everyone gets to see that their representative hopefully really does care when there are human rights atrocities happening, which are happening quite often. So that was really important for me, I think, to, it's easy for folks to feel that politicians and politics are jaded and kind of uninterested in the experiences of everyday people. But I was lucky enough to just be there and see it. And I definitely hold that with me.
That's cool. I think my favorite part of that is that she is making time for like younger generations, and like she understands that she's going to at some point be passing the baton. So yes, oh my gosh. I mean, I loved her already, but yes, like I'm just glad to hear that she lives up to
definitely. I was kind of scared because I was like, oh my goodness, I love this woman. Like, and I'm going to like see her and work where she works. So it will happen. But I mean, my esteem for her grew and has only grown. So definitely.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, actually, so I figured my dad gave me this shirt for Christmas.
Nice.
Katie Porter's Whiteboard Energy. Thank you, Dad. I'm sure you'll hear this because you're very supportive and lovely. I will probably not wear this shirt in public, but I figured if anybody was going to appreciate it, it would probably be you.
I definitely do appreciate it.
Nice. Maya, I am hoping that you can help me with holding my friends and family accountable. I've come to, particularly as a white person, I'm coming to understand that one of the most important things that I can do is just to keep chipping away at the other people in my life who are opposed to progress or neutral, which is just as bad, or maybe not just as bad, but it's very bad. And not to push them away, not to say oh, well, she's racist, I'm not going to talk to her anymore. Those are my people and they are my responsibility. And that's a little bit of a different, I hadn't necessarily cut anybody out of my life, but I had with some family members just been I'm never talking about this with them again. And I think there's probably like a happy medium between like getting in a blowout fight where you never speak to them again and just like pushing back against some of the harmful things that they have to say. So how do I help the people in the white people especially understand that like racial justice is very much their problem too, and that remaining neutral is siding with the oppressor, and like how do I hold them accountable?
That's a great question. I think accountability is interesting because it can operate in a very theoretical space where, people have thoughts and emotional reactions that are inappropriate, if not racist, that you want to respond to, rein in, and reflect on with the people who are engaging in behavior that is not acceptable. And then there's also a form of accountability in the actual tangible and material actions that people take in their communities. And I find that those are often separate. There's can be a gulf between the way people think and speak and the way that they will engage with people that they know. And it can be helpful to start to explain how if you are, talking one way but acting another, that a person themselves might have some cognitive dissonance that they might be able to begin to understand why their thoughts and the things that they say don't add up to the way they actually believe that people should act out in the world. And you want to focus on that last one because it tends to be like a more aspirational and complete version for most people. It's not true for everyone, certainly. But so, I think about how, I'm from New Jersey. I'm from Montclair, New Jersey, which is a town that's 30 minutes from Manhattan. It's considered incredibly liberal. There's jokes about how most of the people who live there are New York Times writers or some other form of culture maker. And it touts itself often as being incredibly, incredibly diverse. And this summer, there was actually an incident where a Black family had the police called on them for building some sort of barbecue pit in their own backyard. And that kind of shattered the idea that we held of ourselves as, this liberal bastion of, racial equity and acceptance. But it also forced people to recognize that there were little racist things that were happening that were actually not something that you would want to actually reflect who you are. So when you bring it down to your neighbors, and this works particularly well when people have Black neighbors, which is not always the case because of the history of redlining and housing segregation in the country. Or Black people who you know or see on TV. This is often a place where representation is actually incredibly important. Trying to hammer home for people that they live in a country, in a town, in a school district where there are people of different races, religions, gender identities, sexualities, and that, you would expect that person who you love, who's in your family, to treat those individual people who they know with respect. And that actually the things that they're saying are highly offensive and harmful to people who they would claim to love and respect. And I think that's kind of trying to imprint on people that they live in a society where the health of one person, especially during a global pandemic, the health of one person has a huge effect on the overall health of the community, really making things local clearly. And I think that honestly ties to the way I think about democracy too. When you feel as though you have ownership over a place, when you feel as though you have a stake in the health, in the kind of education level, in the housing, safety, all of these things, when you have a stake in the experience of your neighbors, you are far more likely to want to participate in the democratic process, to volunteer as a poll worker to make sure that your neighbors can be able to vote, to go to, local meetings, to take a stand on issues that you think are affecting your neighbors. And that's especially helpful when you're able to spend privilege as a white person on, again, volunteering as a poll worker, because we know that poll closings most often affect Black and brown and poor communities the most. Going to a town hall to talk about policing, because we know that poor communities of color, don't often have as much time to go to meetings in the middle of the day. And so really trying to think about how Black people are just real people who exist next door.
I'm so sorry that you have to say that. But
it's true, and it can go a long way. And for folks that it doesn't work on, it might honestly not be worth your time. It might be more valuable to give money to be the person who's speaking up about policing, about disparities in education and health disparities, to be the person who asks, in New York City, for example, Black people, I think the statistic is for every 3 white people who are vaccinated in New York City, 1 Black person has been vaccinated. To be the person who calls into the radio and demands an answer from the governor or the mayor on those issues. And so you definitely want to think about the most effective way to spend your time. You want to think, is this person persuadable or are they not persuadable, and move on if they're not persuadable. But definitely grounding things in community, in neighbors, in the people who you know and would ideally treat with respect is super important.
Okay, there were so many good points in there. I especially think that with a handful of people in your life, say that your dad or something and is a Trump supporter or believes that there was election fraud, widespread election fraud. Oh, so that person is never not going to be in your life. My dad is not. He's great. But other than that, you could keep chipping away at that person, but it might just not be worth your time. It might, because especially in America with the voting rate so low, there are so many people who aren't involved at all. And I'm more interested in trying to convince them that they should care, which is easy. Well, from the non-voters that I've talked to in my life who I spend a while talking to them, they hear how passionate I am about it, and then they want to get involved. That's so much easier than trying to convince somebody who's already decided yes. Also, you mentioned going to forums, policing forums, and I can't remember if I've told this on this podcast before, but I will tell you. I went to our local policing and equity forum. There were 3 local police chiefs there, and the very first question was about anti-racism, and they let each chief respond, and they were all just so disappointing. Their answers were all well, we're trying to hire more women and more minorities. And I was like, that's what you think anti-racism is? This is why I'm not interested in reforming you. You're not even trying. You're not even trying. So yes, more people go to stuff like that to realize that I don't know, there's people complaining. So maybe you know this, but a really important criminal justice reform bill just passed in Illinois. Our governor has not signed it yet, but he's going to, and it is incredible. It reforms cash bail, more body camera stuff. It's so good. So much more transparency. It's so good. People's main complaint about it is that the police weren't involved in writing it. And it's why would I care if they I just went to a forum where the guys in charge of the police thought anti-racism was trying to hire more women. I don't care if they're involved. That's like asking if whatever. You understand. But it's just go to more stuff like that, because it'll probably be eye-opening, I would think. But yes, also there's plenty. Yeah, that's such a good point. instead of wasting your time arguing with your cousin's husband or something like that, you could be spending money. Or I have been I've sent a couple letters to the editor recently, mostly about like democracy reform. I don't think any of them have gotten printed, but I do think that's like an interesting way to expand. And I'm hoping to have somebody on the podcast soon to explain like just the process of writing a letter to the editor, because that will have a much more wide-reaching audience that is probably less progressive than your average. But yeah, okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
I'm so glad.
Is there anything that you wanted to say in response to that before I ask you your next question? Or to
no,
whatever
ask away.
Okay, so I have been cautiously heartened to see that so many companies have been suspending political donations to the Republicans in Congress who voted not to certify the election results. And I say like cautiously because like we're in the very beginning of a cycle. So like a lot of businesses pause their donations right now because they don't there's just not a lot going on electorally. So I will be impressed if they continue to withhold those donations from them. But I think that just goes back to like, yeah, everything is connected in politics. So how do we continue to like hold those businesses accountable, and like how do they play into the political world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in 2020, we saw a ton of companies mobilizing around voter turnout, around, like I mentioned, protecting polling places, making sure that they were staffed, making sure that folks had PPE. Uber worked with a nonprofit called Pizza to the Polls to make sure that folks around polling places had food. We saw videos of Paul Rudd in New York, like handing out Milk Bar cookies to folks around polling places, food open to anyone in the area, which is always really fun, especially if it's Paul Rudd handing you a cookie.
I would die, but
yeah, me too. I'm glad I wasn't there because I'd be done now. So there is certainly precedent for companies taking a stand in terms of identifying the integrity of our democracy as something that's in their best interest, in the best interest of their employees, in the best interest of their consumers. And we're seeing now, especially in the wake of 2020 and also the racial uprisings, that consumers actually expect brands to take stands on the issues that are important to them. And they are actually doing research on whether or not the companies that are important to them, the companies that they frequent, have said anything really on racial justice, on the importance of being able to vote, on climate, the list goes on and on. So it's important first to know that companies are on notice in terms of the very real data that we have now on the relationship between consumers, companies, and social issues. So that's the first thing, that like this is a real phenomenon that we're seeing that will only continue. The second thing I would say is that companies are really engaging with consumers on Twitter. I was on Twitter the other day, and this is not strictly political, but I saw that Nike just created its first hands-free shoe. So you can kind of just slide your foot in.
I saw that too.
Yeah, but I saw that, and then I saw that a teenager with cerebral palsy named Matthew Walter actually wrote to Nike a few years ago asking for a shoe that is easy for disabled people to just like throw on and get going. And he worked with them on designing that shoe. And so that's really cool, and an incredibly material example of how people can advocate for their communities and their needs from specific companies. But when it comes to politics, to democracy and its protection, I think it's important to know that companies are really listening, that they understand that consumers are making decisions based on whether or not they feel the companies share their values, and we can continue to hold them accountable via social media actions, through letters. I mentioned I'm just a huge radio listener. I listen to the radio like all day. Folks can call into the radio, and like in my case, I listen to WMIC. Tons of people are listening to that. So there's a lot of ways for people's voices to be amplified. I would also say, if you have an issue that you think other people will be concerned about, I think our democracy is one of those issues. It's always, better, I would say, to start a petition to show that a lot of people are actually on your side in terms of holding not only companies accountable, but the people who you just voted into office, the people who are working for you. So I'm really excited. I'm particularly excited, though, about the ways that companies stepped in to make sure that people could vote in 2020, to make sure that their employees could vote. A whole host of organizations signed on to an agreement to give their employees paid time off on election day. Those are things that have a real and immediate impact on people. And it's really exciting to see those initiatives and actions being taken and continue to have an effect.
Yeah, for sure. That is a good point. We give so much power to corporations. Like we let them donate like they're people, as if they have First Amendment rights like we do. So yeah, if we're going to give them all this power, let's hold them accountable to make sure that they're using that power for good. That is like that's an efficient use of your time. That makes sense.
Definitely.
That's them making it easier to vote. Like that we should just have an understanding that like it's good when people vote. It's good when more people vote. The reason that they make it hard to vote is so that less people vote, so that their power goes further, and they as the people who have the most power. And it's still women are only a quarter of Congress. Still people of color are a quarter of Congress. Like, but okay, sorry, I guess I shouldn't be so pessimistic. Like it's improving, we're getting there, but like it will, once it's actually like Congress actually reflects what and then did I say this? Half of Congress is millionaires. I think I say this every episode. So, but still, like, yeah, they're not normal people. They're not going to be advocating on your behalf. Like you have a vote, you can donate money, whatever, but companies have all this power, and you should be making sure that the ones you're supporting are pushing for like positive political change. That's so good. That's such a good point. There's so many ways that people, everybody's a little micro influencer.
Yeah, I think it's especially interesting for me because a lot of the brands that I am a huge fan of are very, very active on Instagram in particular. And that's very specific. They are targeting me, a 22-year-old woman out here with some disposable income. But the flip side of that is that they are highly sensitive to campaigns on social media to highlight their less savory actions or to congratulate them on incredible work that they are doing. And so I think there's plenty of examples of times when people have poo-pooed actions on social media activism. But I think it's important not to ignore the amplification powers that social media has. And I can give you a quick example. I recently learned that there was a course at Harvard that was essentially touting the use of counterintelligence tactics from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq on the citizens of a town in Massachusetts via their police force. And so this course was a case study on that process of really bringing the tactics of war to streets in a town in Massachusetts where Black and brown people have been brutalized by the police and oppressed. And upon learning this, was horrified. And I was horrified because it's terrifying, but I was also horrified because I am a member of that community. And I felt like just crushed that an institution that I was part of was doing something that was absolutely antithetical to my values. And honestly, at times you can think of Harvard or any school or institution as a business in that they have interests. There's money attached to those interests, and they have people who act in some ways as consumers, and in my case as a student who pays. I am a consumer of their product.
Mm-hmm.
And so fellow students were outraged and signed on to online petitions, were tweeting, posting, myself included. And within, I think, 2 days, that class was revoked.
Wow.
And they, in the email alerting people to the fact that it had been withdrawn, they specifically cited concerns voiced, quote, on social media. And so I think that's super important, especially the part where I felt like I had a stake in the kinds of things that my school was doing. I felt responsible, and, you know, my name has their name attached oftentimes. And the same goes for all of the communities that we are a part of. And as consumers, especially avid consumers of distinct brands, I think you can make an argument that the same applies, that I, you know, adore X product and I want my values to be as closely aligned as possible to the company that's making those products. And there is an outlet for engaging with companies. And, you know, like I said, a lot of people are mobilizing and companies are listening and doing the work of really digging into how they can be participants in our democracy and in a way that's empowering the people who fall into those communities. And really the same goes, the same idea of having a stake in what's going on in the actions that are being taken. The same goes for local municipalities, states, and the country as a whole. Really, we have, I would say, a responsibility to ourselves and to the people around us to really engage, to be able to map out the power structures in our towns, in our states, in our country, to know, you know, who did I just elect? Who was just elected? Who's supposed to be working for me now? How do I contact them? You know, when is the next local election? Because even though 2020 is over, there's tons of elections happening all around the country, including in New York City, where the mayor is going to be elected in June. So really, it's about, I think, having respect for yourself, love for yourself, knowing that you matter and that your voice matters, and then having the tools to be able to translate the power that you know you are owed into your actual level of engagement in the democratic decision-making process that we all have in all of its forms, be it, you know, local, state, national elections, or the institutions that you're a part of that are making decisions that you can have an impact on, or the way that you're engaging with the brands that you love.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as women in particular, they try to teach, maybe not explicitly, but you're taught your whole life that like you don't have as much power. Yeah, as soon as you like realize that you do, it's like, oh yeah, I should exert this everywhere because I know that for centuries white dudes have been doing that. So like, yeah, it's time to push back.
No, definitely.
So speaking of how our Congress is not necessarily I mean, it's not. It doesn't reflect the country. Do you want to talk about like the benefit of having people who like maybe don't see themselves represented so often in American politics, like what how everybody has something to offer and how it's better when more voices are and more perspectives are being heard?
Yes, definitely. I think, you know, we have a democracy, we have a representative democracy. That's quite literally what it's called. And it cannot function at its highest level of effectiveness if the folks in Congress cannot adequately represent the people that they are supposed to represent. And that's not to say that, you know, someone who doesn't look like me or have my same gender identity can't represent me. But it does mean that the makeup of the entirety of the U.S. Congress should definitely be more closely aligned to the makeup of the United States in terms of race, gender, sexual identity, in terms of religion, in terms of wealth, definitely. And so, you know, I think lived experiences often have a huge, huge impact on the way that people move through the world and the way that they are able to see things that are going on, how things are affecting others, the way they're able to hold back judgment, knowing that there might be something going on under the surface that perhaps they themselves or someone else has experienced. And so it's really important that folks can draw on their lived experiences in order to connect with the people that they represent and the experiences that those folks have as members of our society. And so I definitely think that, the problem of representation in Congress is a huge problem. And I also think it actually reflects something far more insidious, which is that poor people, people of color, and women don't have the resources that they need to become members of Congress, even if they wanted to. Mm-hmm. That is also a huge problem, and one that, we want folks to have resources and then be able to make decisions about who they want to be and hope that maybe some of them want to be members of Congress. I do think, though, that it's really exciting to see so many different people engaging in politics. 2020 was really, really exciting in terms of how many people turned out. It's the highest turnout rate since 1900. We saw, so many celebrities who they themselves represent all different kinds of audiences, people from every corner of this country, and they were channeling the energy of the folks that they are in concert with. So that was really exciting. And people also stepped up to support each other. We saw that especially with poll workers and the over 700,000 people who signed up through Power the Polls to serve as poll workers, most of whom had never done it before. But then we also saw it with people texting 3 friends saying, hey, I think you should head out to vote. We saw it with people joining protests over the summer who maybe had never done that before. And so I definitely think there are examples all over the country of people stepping up and engaging in a way that they haven't before. And I think in order to maintain that adrenaline, really, that energy, people need to continue to be aware that the power that they had at the ballot box, there's more ballot boxes, there are other elections, but then there's also different avenues for staying engaged and really for remembering that power didn't go away after you cast your ballot. You are very much still a part of our democracy. And that goes for people who couldn't vote for whatever reason. So it's exciting to see the demographic of people who are really tapping into civic engagement as a way of life shifting. And my hope is that, over time maybe, but hopefully sooner than later, translates into who we actually see on C-SPAN.
Yeah, it will. It totally will. Like, I've been patient, but you're right. It totally will. And it already is. I mean, Cori Bush was an activist. AOC was a bartender. Yeah. That's who I want in Congress. The issues that Cori Bush cares about are the issues that I care about. The jobs I've had much more closely resemble the jobs AOC has had than so. Yeah. So that'll keep happening. Of course, my representative is Marie Newman, who, very progressive. I was just thinking about it today. On all levels of government, I have pretty much excellent representatives. Even my state rep, state senator, all the way up. Dick Durbin is fine, but but I am pretty lucky. But there are still so many options. My Indivisible group just created a subcommittee for climate change and is going to be putting together, because we talked to some people from the our local trustees, and we were like, what are we doing about climate change? And they were like, and we were like, okay, well, if we put together a proposal for like towns that are similarly sized, would you guys look at it? And they were like, oh my God, we would love that. So like, yeah,
Amazing.
that's power, you know, that's it.
Mhm.
We just, there's no, okay, sorry. If you live in Chicago, there are elections coming up on April 6th. There are municipal elections, but,
Yes.
but there are other ways that you can exert your power.
Definitely.
So yeah, I think that's important. Don't forget that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. I, over the summer, worked with a bunch of other people who ranged dramatically in terms of age, racial identity, income. It was a very motley crew of people, but we worked together to present to our mayor and town council about policing in our town. And that was really amazing. I was, hanging out with 60-year-olds and also 15-year-olds and also presenting to the town about what we thought policing should look like. And that was really exciting because, we reached out and they were like, yeah, sure. Like, we'll do a Zoom. The bar was much lower than I thought, but it also exposed me to a huge network of people in my town who are doing work that is really important to me, but that I didn't know was actually being done. And there are all sorts of ways to really tap into those networks. There are, mutual aid networks that are just literally helping people to eat, to have the money that they need, to make it through the days of this harrowing pandemic. There's a Sunrise Hub in my town that's doing climate work. There are tons of opportunities to plug in. And, you mentioned power. I really think of politics and civic engagement as just a practice in building power for folks and, engaging with the people who are representing them. So yeah, there's so many different ways to stay involved and really to think of yourself as part of the whole and therefore entitled to engage in the democratic process and really take that to heart as something that is your right as a human.
Yeah, for sure. And even bigger than that, it's a part of history. And like, I want to make sure that the part that I was alive for, like, we make as much progress as possible so that next time we can make even more, or whoever, children can make even more progress.
Definitely.
Well, is there anything that we haven't mentioned that you wanted to talk about before we move on to like stuff you're reading or watching?
I would say, we talked about companies as from a consumer standpoint, but I would also say that a lot of people are employees at places and can use their power as employees to push the organizations that they're a part of to take stands on issues that are important to them, particularly with companies who are creating space for their employees themselves to be participants in our democracy. So really thinking about your membership in different spheres of life, be they corporate or educational or, municipal, and then figuring out how you can dig in and really think about the democratic systems that you're a part of and the ways that you can make change is really cool. And I think you'll find fun and creative ways to build power again and really be a part of our democracy and all of its complexities and vastness, but also excitingness. And yeah,
for sure. That's a good point. Well, is there anything that you are like reading or watching right now that you think other people should read? Like what's really caught your attention lately?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have been watching, just embarrassing. I've been rewatching Arrested Development.
Oh, that's a good show.
Which is really funny. It's my I want to laugh now kind of time for myself show. But it's interesting because I, watched it a while ago and then I watched it again and was doing research and I came across kind of upsetting tidbit, which was that the cast was interviewed by the New York Times, and during that interview, one of the main characters, who's absolutely wonderful, she revealed that one of her male co-workers had like been berating her on set for like years. And the New York Times published the audio of them having this conversation where she kind of explained what had happened, and it was an emotional conversation, and she ultimately talked about how, like, in order to move forward, his apology and commitment to, you know, halting that behavior would be important. And there was like a tearful kind of, I guess, agreement to move forward with the knowledge that like he would have to stop making her uncomfortable. And so one, I felt kind of horribly that I had been watching this show and enjoying it. But it was also fascinating for me to like see kind of a reconciliation, or hear a reconciliation process like that. And the New York Times was crazy. I thought that they published it. So yeah, I don't know. It's been a wild ride me watching Arrested Development, but I think, yeah, I definitely, it was interesting for me to like see that so publicly, a kind of like healing process. And I feel like so much of Hollywood has been under that.
Yeah. Yeah. Not a lot of people have examples of, like positive conflict resolution. Did it work? Did he stop doing that?
I would hope so. I think the show's over. So, but it definitely seems, and you know, their co-stars were there too. So I would hope that there will be some kind of accountability process. But on a lighter note, I have also been reading a huge book called Black Futures. It's a multimedia kind of photo essay, like very thick and pretty kind of book. And it has a lot of incredible artists that I love and whose work I've admired for a super long time. And there's also the writing of one of my favorite professors at school. Her name is Sarah Lewis. She's wonderful. And she writes about how visual culture, painting, photography, etc., has been really important in the civil rights movement, and has also at times been a force for racism in the world. But the book is super beautiful and just pretty to look at, which is nice. Yeah.
That's a good one. I've been reading a book called Small Doses by Amanda Seales. I've been try to have some lighter stuff, but I don't, you know who Amanda Seales is?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So she's very funny, of course, but Small Doses has been a really good book that I've been reading. I also, well, I don't know if I said this last time. If you are an Instagram person, there is one woman on Instagram. Her @ is Sharon Says So. Her name is Sharon McMahon. And she does such a good job of explaining why each side thinks the way that they do. So like so many times I hear a more conservative person's opinion, and I just don't even understand how you could get there. Like it just doesn't make any sense to me. And like, so I think a lot of people use her. She was a former government professor. So she really is, she provides like straight down the middle. She won't tell people what her like political affiliation is. She just wants to like provide what the facts are. And then she also gives space for her liberal followers to explain why they believe a certain thing. And then she gives space for her conservative followers to explain something. And it has just helped me so much to be like, oh, they're not like more, I mean, some of them maybe are, but they're not, they just like, they see this problem in a completely different way. And it's like illogical, but at least like I can find the logic. So I suggest that as a follow for people who like getting information for their like political information from Instagram. Yes, that's good. What about self-care is very important, of course, during the pandemic this year, especially. Have you found anything like in particular that's been helping you make it through?
Yes, I definitely have. So my parents kindly got me a monthly tea subscription.
Oh,
And it's like loose teas from all over the world. They are delicious. And so I'm always trying a new tea. Right now I have Moroccan mint. It is very good.
that does sound
Adding
good.
sugar is optional, but it's super delicious. And then I also basically always have a candle lit. And so those two, sipping tea and smelling wonderful smells from my candle, have been huge for me. And really, I've been like doing both of those things for maybe like 8 months now. So my candle budget is a little out of control, but they both help a lot. And then, it's pretty cold, but I try to go out and walk as much as possible. Fresh air is key. Do you have fun coping mechanisms?
It's cold here too. So yes, the walking has taken a backseat. Lately, I got a planner that makes you schedule self-care first, and then you put in the other stuff later, which is good because I tend to just like let it fall off my plate at the end of the day. But it's like there's a little section that's like what self-care helps you, and like as you actually have to like sit down and think about it, and I was like, fine, I'll sit down and think about it. But there are a lot of things. So the two things that I've been like trying to schedule into my week is like baking one recipe, like looking forward to like one thing to bake. I think this week will be cherry pie. And then I'm a plant person. There are a lot of plants around here. So
amazing.
There's always a plant project. So I've just been like trying to incorporate into my week, like one day a week, like some sort of plant project that I'm going to do. Sometimes it's like splitting them up and putting them into smaller pots. I think now it's going to be putting all of them back, all the ones that have the same thing back in a big pot. Whatever. It's distracting and it's working with my hands. It's been going well.
Oh, that sounds amazing. That sounds wonderful. And very pretty too. I like green things.
Thank you. Yes, green things are very helpful. They calm me down. Whenever I really don't like my job, you can tell because I've brought like a ton of plants into my office so that I can like just distract myself. But it's been a long time. It's been a long time. Well, is there anything else you want to say before I sign us off?
I don't think so. It's really been a pleasure to talk with you. I'm really, really, truly, genuinely excited to see people continue to think of politics as something that belongs to them. And so I hope, in 2 or 3 years, we could look back on this conversation and laugh that it was ever a question that people would stay engaged.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good point. I hope that's true too. I mean, I don't see people getting unradicalized. Like you can't unlearn all the stuff that you have seen. So, I mean, you can, apparently some people can go back to ignoring it, but I bet there's a lot of people who can't. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful also. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Do you want people to like follow you on social media or anything like that?
Oh, sure. Let's see. On Twitter, you can find me at Maya M. Jenkins 1. Okay. And on Instagram, you can find me at Maya M. Jenkins.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go seek you out.
Oh, amazing. Thank you for having me.
Thank you guys so much for listening to For Your Misinformation. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast, and if you like it, give us a rating and a review.
It helps us find more listeners, and the more of us there are, the better. And make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter at FYMI Pod.
Shout out to Ben Schlofelt for the audio production, Hope Dye for the podcast art, Kyle Dibdahl for the intro and outro music, and Adam Roston, who edits these videos every week so you can watch them on YouTube.
We come out with new episodes every Monday.